everyone to our, let's see, what are these called? Practical application breakouts. So this is just like the honing in on the practical application of some of those deeply rooted truths that we just heard about from Luke and Paige. So I would like to introduce you to Carly McCormick. She works with Thrivent Financial and is just brilliant in this topic. And this topic we've called Hired, What Comes Next, a conversation about personal budgets, benefits, and investments. So whether you already have a job lined up or you're in the grind of the job search, this is like the nitty gritty of what becomes reality with work after college. So this is like how to wisely navigate your own finances, how to interpret the work lingo about what you're being compensated, determining which benefits from work you personally value. So when Paige was making the comment in the last section about being afraid of 401ks, like this is the session she wished she had. And so I'm always on my soapbox about like, why didn't anybody teach me about money before I graduated? So that's why you're here. Wise choice. I can let Carly take it from here. Carly, they can speak back to us. So if you'd like to know who's in the room, feel free, but I will turn it over to you.
Cool. Hello, everyone. Like she said, my name is Carly. I've been working with Thrivent for 4 years. So Thrivent is a faith-based financial company. We do holistic financial planning for individuals of kind of all different ages. But the goal of today is kind of trying to give you an overview of some basics, and then I'm going to drill down a little bit into a few specifics, but I'll try not to go too deep to leave kind of opportunities for questions. Kind of trying to put myself in your shoes a little bit of when I was graduating, what did I not know, and share more about those things to kind of give you an outline of how do you move forward when you start to receive some sort of paycheck, hopefully in the future. So I'm going to screen share. I created a very basic outline that I'll just use as a reference for talking points as to how to move forward with this conversation. At any point in time, if you guys want to interject, feel free to kind of ask questions, but we do have time at the end specifically to kind of go through any questions that you guys may be having. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Okay, can you guys see this all right?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So finances post-college, Carly, that's me, financial advisor with Thrivent. Oops, here we go again. Will it let me? There we go. So the basics that I'm going to talk about today, having an income. So kind of what does that mean? Or when you have an income from work, how does what you're told you're going to get paid translate into what you actually receive in a paycheck, which might be the biggest unfortunate surprise when you start working is what they say never feels very true to what you end up getting. So kind of want to clarify what that actually looks like or what will be deducted from your paycheck so you can have a good understanding of what this might translate into when you start receiving some income. Budgeting, kind of what does that mean? Why is it important? And how to even start creating one? I want to talk about debt a little bit. Just how do you even go about tackling debt? What is kind of normal within debt? So maybe taking some of the fear away if you are entering the workforce with different forms of debt already on your plate. How do you handle that wisely? And then lastly, just generosity, which is important for me and as I know believers and just people who have faith as a cornerstone for their belief system. Generosity is something that we value. And so I want to make sure that I touch about just the importance of that right from the get-go after graduating. So I will jump on into income expectations. So one of the biggest things that I want you guys to be prepared for when starting is the difference from what they're told, what you're told you're going to get paid to what you actually receive. So for instance, I have often talked to individuals who they graduated college, they were told they're going to make $40,000 a year. Maybe you graduate and you make less, you make more, but just as a reference point, $40,000. If you take $40,000, you divide that by 12, your expectation is you're going to be bringing home like $3,300 a month approximately. And that sounds like, especially if you're coming from college where you might not be having much of an income, to making over $3,000 a month, that probably sounds like a good chunk of change. The biggest thing to be aware of, or that I would suggest, is when you're given an hourly rate, if that's what you're going to move into, or if you're going to be given a salary of, say, 40,000 or whatever it is, multiply that by 0.7. So taking 70% of that, or even 65% of that, and estimate that that's actually going to be your take home pay. So $40,000, 70% of that is around 2,300. And that's, of course, a whole $1,000 difference. And on a monthly basis, that's really big. But it's better to underestimate what you're going to get as a take home pay than overestimate. And 70% is definitely a good ballpark. And you might see it's closer to 65. So 65 to 70% of what your salary is what you end up actually bringing home. And these three things that I have listed out are the reasons why. So I'm going to go through kind of why do I only get 60, 65, 70% of my income. The first one being taxes. So these are all things that we have some understanding, whether you've had a job that you worked in college, in high school, some sort of awareness of. You obviously have some pretty big deductions coming out of your paycheck. What the amount of taxes that come out are state and federal. So dependent on where you live, if you live in Wisconsin, you're going to have a certain percentage come out. And if you move to Texas, that percentage is going to change. So state is totally dependent on where you are located. Federal is 100% dependent on what your current income is. So approximately 12% will probably be taken out every single paycheck for federal, and maybe 5 to 10% will be taken out for state. So right off the bat, 15 to 20% of your income will come off from taxes. If you end up being a really high earner, it'll actually be a larger percentage. But just for some estimates, you're going to have state and federal deducted right away. Benefits. So this is the big thing that from previous jobs, you probably haven't had to worry about at all. So when we think about benefits, you're going to get a massive PDF package, and it's going to have so much information that you're not going to know what to do with it. That's not a bad thing. And just to warn you, this is completely normal. Every once in a while, I meet with someone and they're like, I don't understand my benefits, and they're super embarrassed about it. Nothing to be embarrassed about. It's going to be like a 30-page document, and you're not going to know what to do. Health insurance is kind of the biggest question mark for individuals graduating from college. The reason being is legally, as of, 4-5 years ago, can't remember when the law was kind of passed, but you do not have to be on your own health insurance until the month after you turn 26. So it's a common question for individuals asking, should I go on my own health insurance or should I stay on my family's health insurance? Unfortunately, there's not a super clear-cut answer there for you. But be aware of the cost of said things. So this kind of will get into a little bit of budget wise, but if you choose to stay on your parents' health insurance, make sure that you understand when that transition happens, it's going to be $50 a month, $100 a month, $200 a month. Every single work environment is going to have a different cost associated, but make sure you're prepared and able to take on the cost difference from when you're on your parents to when you transfer off your parents. It is not normal for people to stay on their parents, and it's not normal for people to transition off their parents. Every single person has a different situation. Some individuals have to get off their parents the immediate they start. Some individuals don't have health insurance through their parents, and so that was never an option for you. Some individuals want to stay on their parents' health plan. So just so you're aware, it comes down to your situation, but try not to feel like that there should be something that you should be doing. You just need to do whatever is in your best interest. Knowing that when you're given this packet of information, you're most likely going to have 3 different health plans to choose from. This is something that's going to get a little bit down into details. The health insurance, if you choose the one that costs the least amount, so maybe $50 a month, that means when you go to the doctor, you're going to have a much larger bill. If you're paying more for health insurance, you're going to have a smaller doctor bill. So if you go to the doctor all the time, it might be in your benefit to pay more for health insurance and lower for bills. If you never see the doctor and you feel like you could afford a large medical bill if something happened to you, maybe you pay the smallest amount possible for health insurance. At any point in time, if you have specific questions, I could be a resource to you. There's other adults out there too. Don't feel embarrassed about asking anyone in the working world, how do I select a health insurance plan? A lot of people are able to walk you through that or at least point you in the right direction, as that's probably the most confusing part of benefits package is health insurance. Next one that's important is disability insurance. Disability insurance is something that graduating college students don't often think about because you're kind of still most likely in that stage where everything is new is exciting and you don't think about your body breaking down because you're like in your 20s. Disability insurance, in short, is if you were to become sick, hurt, or injured, what would your company pay you? So this isn't necessarily something you can select. This is just what they give you. There's not options. It's just something to be aware of. If I was off work for 2 months because I had a torn ACL and I was a nurse and I couldn't go to the hospital, what would I be getting? Would I be getting 10% of my income, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70? This is just something for you to be aware of because this is going to impact what sort of emergency savings you should be working towards. So just something to keep in mind. You don't select disability insurance, but you want to know what you're offered through your work plan. You most likely will have to pay something for disability insurance, but not everyone. So far, you get your salary, you have taxes deducted, you have to pay for your health insurance. So that's the biggest deduction. You might have to pay for a disability insurance. They might offer you to pay for some sort of life insurance policy, or they might give you something of the sort. Life insurance, in short, if you die, someone gets money. That's what life insurance is. Not super exciting to talk about, but at some point in time, it's going to become very valuable and very necessary for you in your kind of plan based on your circumstances. And when you start a job, they give you something. Usually they'll say, if we're giving you $40,000 a year, that's your salary. Something was to happen to you, we're going to pay $40,000 out to somebody. So you need to list a beneficiary when you're giving benefit packages. So the third one that you're going to see as a deduction from your paycheck is going to be retirement. So retirement is something that is super important. And I'm, as a financial advisor, I'm not going to show you graphs and illustrations as to why. If you get a job, you start working and you want to know more, I can be a resource. There's tons of resources out there. The biggest thing I'm going to tell you is start contributing right away. For someone who graduates college is 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, whether you're a grad student or an undergrad, if you start saving right away for retirement, you're going to have to save a lot less out of your pocket than if you waited till you were in your 30s. It is not uncommon for individuals to have the mindset of, I'm going to start working, I'm going to start paying off debt, I'm going to understand what my income is, maybe I'll start being generous, and then at some point I'm going to start saving for retirement. You're doing yourself a major disadvantage because instead of saving a couple $100 a month, you might need to be saving double that if you wait 10 years. So just as a thought there, first thing first, save something right away. The goal is to be getting to saving about 10% of your income. So that's a goal that we have there. If you start right out of college and you have a very low salary, it's not uncommon. It's not a bad thing. If that's your situation and you're just scraping by to pay rent and to pay off your student loans, do what you can with the mindset of your goal is to get up to that 10%. you also might start working and you might have more money than you've ever had in your life, and you could be saving more like 12%. If that's your situation, that's great too. With retirement plans, you're usually given an option. The most common one is a 401k. If you are a school teacher, work for a nonprofit, you're going to have something called the 403b. You work for a very small company, it might be a SEP IRA or a simple IRA. Those are all basically the same thing, so don't let the name confuse you. It's just how the government is going to organize exactly what plan it is. But for your kind of mindset, 401k, 403b, IRA, they're investment vehicles to be saving for retirement. So in general, you're going to be putting money somewhere and it's going to grow based on interest that you're going to receive via investments. The biggest benefit to any sort of 401k, IRA, whatever it is there is, we call it a tax wrapper around there. So when you're putting money in for retirement, it is going to be growing based on your investment selection. And you have to wait until age 59 and a half to take from that. Otherwise you get penalized. But if you wait to age 59 and a half during your working years, you do not have to pay any taxes on any of the gains. That's the quick 401 as to why these things are beneficial. You're decreasing your taxation currently. So one of the things to keep in mind about benefit packages is one of the sections will be around your retirement plan. This is where things can get really confusing. So I'm just going to try to clarify this briefly, and then this will be an area for questions in the future. So if you get a 401k, you'll see something like, we give you a match. It's going to be 50% of 6% up to 3%, and you're going to have a 5-year vesting schedule. And people are like, what in the world does that mean? 50% of 5% up to 3%. Like, what does that mean? So it's common for companies to offer some sort of match. So what they're saying is, we're going to give you 50% dollar for dollar. So every dollar you put in, we're going to give you 50 cents. And usually you contribute based on a percentage. So you're going to say, I'm going to be putting 6% of my income into retirement, and every paycheck that is deducted, and then taxes are deducted, and then you're paid. So you're contributing 6%. The company says, we're going to give you 50 cents the dollar. So a 50% match up to a maximum of 3%. That means the company is only going to give you a maximum of 3%. So if you're putting in 6%, they'll give you 3%, which is 50%. If you're putting in 8%, they're only going to give you that 3% because that's what they're capping out on. So that might be a little bit confusing, even if as I explain it. But the biggest thing to take away is, if you have a company match, make sure you are maximizing that match, because that's just free money they're giving you just to incentivize you to pay for retirement or to be saving for retirement. So make sure you get whatever free money is on the table, because it's an addition to what your salary is. So take the free match, try to be saving 10% in total. So if they're going to give you 3%, now you only need to save 7% out of pocket. So it could be a really big benefit to have a company that's going to be giving you a good match. So just as an overview, when you get your income, expect around 70%, because taxes will be taken out, costs for benefits will be taken out, and you need to take into account that you're going to be saving out of pocket for retirement. And then you'll be getting your paycheck. I just went over a lot. This is probably the most confusing section. Also the most helpful for you guys though. Is there any questions at the moment that kind of come up before I move on?
I could start with one.
Yeah.
Could you just, or I guess my question is, would you have a recommendation between 401ks and Roth IRAs? Because I know when taxes come out are different,
Yes.
and people seem to have opinions one way or the other. Do you have a recommendation?
Yep, big difference. Yes. So when we think about, and I mentioned the tax piece, the biggest benefit to retirement plans is this kind of tax wrapper that you have around there. The tax wrapper actually works differently based on the type of account that you choose. So have you guys heard, can I have a just show of hands? Have you heard of the word Roth IRA, Roth 401k, or is this new to you? Okay, great. So this is how this works. If you have a general 401k, the money that you put in there, you have not paid taxes on. So you're going to get your income, your salary, you're going to have saving for retirement, then taxes, then your paycheck. That's how it works. The benefit is that you're putting money in you haven't paid taxes on. So let's say over the course of your life, you put in $30,000. That $30,000 has grown to $60,000 by the time that you retire. So $30,000 contribution, 30% just growth based on investments. When you get to retirement, every time that you pull from this $60,000 account, you're going to have to pay taxes on it. When you pay taxes, you will be paying taxes in the current tax bracket that you are at in retirement. So one of the things that we are seeing, and I'm not going to get too into the weeds with this, expectation based on current national debt, based on what our taxation is now, which is the lowest it's ever been historically, and based on the fact that usually you start making less money and you grow your income as you go, isn't necessarily true, but because sometimes people switch professions. But as a general kind of understanding, that's how it operates. You're most likely going to be in a higher tax bracket than when you retire than when you are now. So when we think through that, one of the recommendation that is very common is to look at Roth. So the way that the Roth works is you have your salary, you pay your taxes, and then you contribute into your retirement. And this is if you do a Roth 401k option, then you get money to your paycheck. The way that works is you save $30,000. Now this $30,000 you've already paid taxes on, so which means it probably started out at $38,000. Then you gave a chunk of that to the government during your working years. Now you get to $60,000 in retirement. You can take whatever money you want from there whenever, and you don't have to pay any taxes on either what you contributed or the gains. So you get $30,000 of complete tax-free income in retirement. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a phone call and I don't know how to resume share. Here we go. Does that kind of make sense? So you either have to pay taxes now, or I'm sorry, this is later. This was the later bucket. General 401k, Roth 401k, you pay taxes now. You don't have to pay taxes later. Is that kind of helpful? The other thing I'm going to dive into just really briefly, 401k IRA. 401k 403b is connected to your employer. IRA is only connected to you personally. So a 401k, you always want to take the match that's on the table. So my illustration, you're doing 6%, they're doing 3%. Anything above and beyond that, the recommendation is to have an IRA. So I'm going to use me as an example because that makes most sense. If I'm working at Thrivent, I have a 401k at Thrivent, which means everything is going to come with Thrivent's name on it, Thrivent's information. If something happens and I need to pull from my work plan, I have to pay taxes on it, and then I get a 10% penalty from it. If I have an IRA and I choose to, a Roth IRA, and I choose to pull money early, I only have to pay the taxes on the gains. So my money is more accessible to me and I have to pay less fees if something ever happened. Also, with your 401k option, your investment selection is limited based on who the company chooses to be their investment provider. When you have an IRA on your own, you can choose whatever company you want, and there's a much more broad diversity of investment selections within your Roth. So IRA, because it's more flexible, because there's less fees and penalties associated with it if you had to take money. Roth option, because it's a big benefit for taxation, not necessarily now, but in the future, you're going to see big benefits from that. Is that helpful? There's like a lot when you start talking about money. So I'm trying to give as snapshot as I can and hopefully not be too confusing.
Yeah, I found that helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll jump on into the next section if there's no other questions.
That's good.
Next one is budgeting. So budgeting is a conversation that I feel like is very controversial. When thinking about it, either people love budgeting because you're a highly organized individual and you love seeing where things go, or you hate budgeting because you feel like you have to write things down on a piece of paper that tells you you can't have fun. So first things first, a budget is, it's kind of cliche, but instead of your money forcing you or looking at your bank account and kind of forcing you into decisions that you have to make based on the amount of money you have left, you're just telling your money where to go. And so if you are someone that wants to buy 4 pairs of shoes a month, by budgeting, it doesn't mean you can't buy 4 pairs of shoes a month. It just means you're planning ahead of time to buy 4 pairs of shoes a month. So on a personal level, I don't care what your budget looks like, and I don't care where you're telling your money where it needs to go. You just need to do that so that you are prepared as to where it's going to go and what money you're going to have left over at the end of the month to plan for whatever sort of goals that you may have in your life. So when you have your income, I'm going to stick to that $40,000 range. So you take $1,000 away for taxation, retirement, and your benefits that you have to pay for. Then we're going to get into what are the other things that you should be looking at when you look at budgeting. Generosity, I put that as number one because I think if you let it fall to the bottom, you're end up giving a lot less than you really want to give because it's the easiest thing to get rid of from your budget because it's maybe not a necessity for you. So decide what exactly that looks like for you. So schedule in some sort of generosity. Then you list out your needs. So we're thinking, what do you pay for gas? What is your grocery bill? What is your rent cost? These are things that no matter what happens, you're going to have to pay this. So those are your absolute needs. Then you schedule in wants. So that might be your 4 pairs of shoes a month. That might be you love a coffee shop and you go there 4 times a week. That's great. Just plan for it. I don't really care what your wants are. Just put that in. Then the wishes are going to be what we consider a surplus. So if you make $2,300 a month and you're between your generosity, your needs, and your wants, you have $2,200 a month that you spend. You have $100 a month surplus. So we're going to put that towards your wishes. Wishes may be saving for a house. Wishes may be saving more for retirement, maybe wanting to go on a vacation somewhere. You get to choose whatever your wishes are. But the only thing that gets to go towards your wishes are what's surplus from the other areas, which when you schedule this out, you may realize you might want to cut back on your wants, or you might want to get a cheaper apartment so you can have more money to put towards your wishes, so on and so forth. So budgeting gives you an idea of how much money can I put towards my wishes, which means I might need to reorient some of my wants and needs in order to put more towards those things. Maybe you don't have wishes, so you can live in a nicer apartment because that's more valuable to you. Whatever that is, it's a personal choice. Just important to understand your cash flow. So when things come up, you don't need to sit down and spend an hour looking at what your money is. You already know what your budget allows. Second thing within that is saving for some sort of emergency savings. So I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Dave Ramsey. He has been kind of like the finance guru 101 for faith community for a while, which may be changing, but his kind of big thing is save $1,000. After that, figure out what that means. I would encourage you as well, if you are getting to the place of maybe you don't have any sort of savings, when you start working, your number one goal is getting $1,000 into a savings account for an emergency. Maybe you have way more than that. What the next step is, so maybe you have more than $1,000. What should my emergency savings be? 3 to 6 months in expenses. So this is another need. In order for you to know what you need in emergency savings, you have to have a budget because you need to know what are your expenses. So take out the wants, take out the wishes. What would you need if something happened that you lost your job? How much money would you need to be okay for 3 to 6 months? And that's your goal for getting to an emergency savings. The last one, and this is kind of a reminder, budget for fun. Budgets are not meant to be restrictive, but budgets are not meant to say that you can't do things. When my husband and I first started talking about budgeting, he was like adamant that he refused to schedule. He didn't want to budget, didn't want to budget, didn't want to budget. He didn't even spend any money, so I didn't really get it. And then when we budgeted, he actually realized, oh, when I start saying I can spend $100 a month out eating, now he actually started spending more money than before he had a budget because he felt the freedom to do so. So don't think of his budget as being a restrictive thing. It's just a necessary part of financial planning if you want to be wise with your money. Any questions around budgets? It's pretty basic, but
I have a
go ahead.
Well, I know he has the Dave Ramsey has like the 7 baby steps.
Mhm.
I guess personally, like how much of that would you say is like necessary / like do you agree with the order of them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm in a quick snapshot. Dave Ramsey's philosophy is that before saving for retirement or doing any sort of investment planning, you need to be completely debt free. So if I'm honest with you, the general financial industry would not make that a recommendation, because on top of looking at people's values, and so sometimes being debt free is a massive value for someone. And when you're working with a financial advisor, they're going to share with you numbers, but your values is a massive core part of making your financial plan. So if I ran the numbers for you, it would be almost 100% at people's disadvantage to wait to save and invest for retirement or other needs before debt paid off. If I use 2020 as an example, and granted this was kind of a crazy year, but if you had invested, let's say at the start of the year, you had $20,000 invested come 2020, you would have lost about 35% of that come kind of pandemic, April, May. So you would have been down to $14,000. If you would have stuck it out, by the end of the year, you would have had about $25,000 in your bank or in your investment account, meaning you, without contributing anything, you gained $5,000 just by letting your money sit there. If you had debt associated, that's like a 50% growth, year-end 50% growth. That's incredibly high, but that's to show you the power of kind of interest within investments. When you're given some sort of debt, unless it's credit cards, this is like a big asterisk here. Unless it's credit card debt, your interest rate is going to be like 2, 3, 4, 5%. 5% is, for someone your age, lower than we are going to target within the market, which means you're going to be paying less in interest than what you could be gaining in the market. So if you wait all 5 years until you're debt free, you're missing out on more growth than what you're paying in interest. So when we run the numbers, it usually is better for people to not wait, but maybe split the difference. So don't just not pay off your debt, but maybe don't pay 3 times the minimum in order to get debt free so you can start saving. Because if you just pay some here, invest some here, in 10 years, you'll be debt free and your investment account will be a lot bigger than if you were to wait until you were done. I put a big asterisk there because Dave Ramsey has done an incredible job at helping individuals who really struggle with debt. This is not an embarrassing thing. This is not a bad thing, but there are a lot of people within faith communities, outside of faith communities, who have gotten credit cards at a younger age and have really struggled in this budget piece. This is again why this is so important, because if you're following a budget, whether you have a credit card, a debit card, you pay with cash, you're not going to be spending outside your means if you stick to your budget. If you don't have a budget, have never had a budget, and you start getting car loans you can't afford, you buy a house you can't really afford, you start charging everything on a credit card, you're in this massive hole of debt. And Dave Ramsey's biggest thing then is completely reorienting you so you don't live with a debt's not a problem mindset. So it's kind of a long answer, but his biggest focus is this debt vehicle. That being said, it's dependent on the person, but most likely it's not the biggest kind of goal within there. To pay off all your student debt before investing, to pay off all your student debt before planning for a wish of buying a house. You don't need to pay off your student debt before you're planning to save for retirement. So you're not like doing yourself, it's not terrible to choose that route. It just might not be in your best interest financially to do that, as long as you're sticking to a budget and know some financial basics.
I have a question as well.
Mhm.
How would you recommend budgeting as a college student who has a variable income and like that's not super dependent? For example, I work a job where I started the semester working about 12 to 16 hours a week, and now they've racked me down to like 4 hours a week. And I really have no way of picking up more hours. So how would you recommend budgeting with an income that's super variable like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me think about that one. I think for a situation like that, you would honestly just have to change your budget based on the hours. And that might mean if you kind of are really expecting the 10 hours a week, you need to kind of plan your budget around only getting 10 hours a week. And now that you have 4 to 5 hours a week, you kind of need to make sure that that fits within there, or seek extra income to make sure that you're covering your needs at least. If you're saying on a weekly basis, I get approximately 10 to 16 hours of work, so that's a big difference of income. Plan for 10, and then everything above 10 is going to go to your wants and your wishes. So you need to make sure with the lowest income potential that you have, you're going to be able to cover your needs. This is similar to if you end up at some point in life owning a small business, you have no guaranteed income, none at all. So you might get $2,000 one paycheck, $20,000 on no paycheck, and then zero income for the next 6 months. So you have to figure out what I need to live on and kind of live on the basics, and then anything above that will go to your wants and wishes. So does that help? Did that help answer the question at all?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, cool. Any other questions within this?
This might be more just for my personal sanity, but is student debt as much of a beast as a lot of people are saying?
Right. Good question. I'm just going to flip to the next slide because I think the next slide is on debt. And so that'll, right? Yep, debt. This is just a really basic information. So 411 on debt, figure out what you have in debt. I would almost put like under there, don't panic. Like this is just, we're just figuring out where are we starting and where we want to go. And so whether you're excited that you have almost no student debt, or you feel terrified that you have a lot of student debt, at some level, try to remove the emotion and just let's try to make a plan. So the second part, just creating a plan of how are you going to get there. And then number 3, this is just kind of to remember, don't take on more debt than you can handle. And so you might be graduating and you don't have a car and you need a car. Don't go buy a super fancy car because you think your budget is going to allow it. Because then in 2 years, when your friends are traveling and you have a $600 a month car loan, you're going to be really bummed. So when you just graduate, just get the basics until you figure out what exactly your cash flow truly feels like. Going back to the debt, it kind of sucks, but within US, it's kind of a necessity. And that's kind of where I go into the Dave Ramsey. It's a bummer. Don't feel guilty about student debt. The only way that a lot of people get to the place they want to be in life, meaning a career that they find fulfilling, following the passions that they feel like God has placed in their heart, pursuing some or other career-like goal, the only way to do that is by taking on student debt. Biblically, sometimes people have a little bit of a problem with this because the Bible talks about being in debt to no one. I'm not going to touch a ton on that, but the reality is in America today, unless your parents save for you, you unfortunately are going to be having to take on some sort of debt. It's not a bad thing that your parents didn't do that, and it's not your parents' fault. I had to take on student debt. My parents did not save for me for school, and I didn't really care. Truthfully, it made me value my college experience, I think, a lot more than other people, because it felt like I'm paying for this out of pocket. I better care a lot about it. So with that, it is not uncommon for me to sit down with someone who has $5,000 in student debt, $10,000, $20,000, 30, 40, 50. If you choose to go to med school, dentist school, veterinary school, it's very common to have $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 in student debt when you graduate. Those are big numbers. The biggest thing to remember is the importance of creating a plan. So don't let yourself feel like you're drowning in debt. It just is like anything else in life. When you're lost, you can panic about being lost, or you can open your phone and get directions on how to go where you need to go and then start driving in the right direction. And this is the same thing. When you feel overwhelmed by debt, it sucks. And that's just kind of the reality. It's not fun to be in debt, but let's not sit in that. Let's just create a plan of how to get you where you want to be. And for some people, it's I want to be out of debt in 3 years. And for some people, it's I just want to pay the minimums because I want to invest elsewhere and make money elsewhere. Both are great. Is that kind of helpful?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I can, if it's helpful, I can always talk more about your specific situation. But yeah, in general, student debt it's very common. It's very normal. It's not something to be embarrassed about. Just like one quick note that I want to bring up, if you are graduating this year, sometimes individuals have been told graduate and refinance right away to try to get a lower interest rate. At the moment, if you have federal loans and you're graduating in the short term, take some time and don't refinance just yet. So this is a little on the political side, but there is talk of Biden passing some sort of student relief plan of $10,000 to $20,000 in debt. If Biden is doing that, he's in government. He can only remove government loans. And so if you refinance through a private institution, Biden can't force a bank to get rid of your debt. He can only get rid of what would be in the federal mindset. So if you're graduating the short term, while things are kind of settling as to what that might look like, just keep your federal loans as is until we figure out what is that going to be. And then later on down the road, if you want to refinance, if that's something that's meaningful to you, condensing all your debt into one place, that's great. But just as a quick note, maybe just leave things as is for now.
That's really helpful for me because I'm graduating in a few months here. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions around debt? I want to make one quick note. It's not incredibly uncommon for individuals have gone into college starting to pay for things on a credit card for one reason or another. So if you are graduating and you have a lot of credit card debt, that is something that you do want to make your number one priority to pay off. Because if you graduate with $5,000 in credit card debt and you're getting a $40,000 salary, it sounds like you should be able to pay that off quickly. You don't have to worry about it. Credit card debt could have a 25% interest rate, which means if you leave $5,000 untouched, that is going to be $7,500 in no time, absolutely no time. So if you have credit card debt specifically, and that is something that, number one, revisit a budget, but you need to do everything you can to get rid of your credit card debt. Not because credit cards are of the devil, but because you do not want to be starting out with $5,000 in debt and ending up in $15,000 in debt in a year because you didn't realize it. So if you need more information about that, happy to pass that along, but that's the one form of debt that you do want to try to tackle right away.
Okay, I have a question now about that. What's like the balance between using a credit card wisely and not taking out debt? Because I mean, just talking about like, with like, I don't know, this like the FICO credit score, a lot of times either apartments or when you take out a home or when you take out a mortgage, they're going to have to use your credit score. What's like your best advice for using a credit card wisely without taking on a ton of debt?
Yep. So first thing, my recommendation is if you've never had a credit card before and you have never had practice operating in a budget, get your job, start figuring out what your budget is first and foremost, even before starting to use a credit card. Once you figure out, okay, on average, I'm spending about $2,000 a month. That's just what my cash flow looks like. Now I want to start building my credit score. To build your credit score, you don't need to have a certain amount of dollars charged every month. All they're looking for with a FICO credit card is, can you manage debt? So every time you swipe a credit card, you are putting yourself in debt. So they're looking, when you put yourself in debt, do you have a good history of then paying off that debt? That's all the score is looking at. And so if you have a really good history of taking on debt and paying off debt, you're going to have a good credit score. So what that might mean is if when you first get a credit card, usually the recommendation is just buy your groceries and just buy your gas on it, because those things shouldn't be changing. Most likely because you get a credit card, you're not going to start like driving down to Missouri every single day because you're like, oh, I can spend more in gas. Like that's a pretty relatively fixed dollar amount on a monthly basis. So charge it, pay it off. Same thing with groceries. Probably going to stay consistent, charge it, pay it off. And by pay it off, I've worked with individuals that they will pay, like swipe it, and by the time they get to their car, they've already paid it off. If that's what you want to do, you can do that. One thing to note, when you log on to this is how some people get in problems with credit card debt. When you log on to your little credit card app, it'll say minimum payment. Minimum payment is not what you should be paying. You need to open that little section and see what is your statement due. So your minimum payment might be $200, but your statement is $2,000. You need to pay the $2,000 to not have interest kind of thrown at you. The minimum payment is only to avoid a late fee. So making sure on a monthly basis, you're paying off the full balance of whatever's charged on there, but just gas and groceries will do as much as you possibly can to get a good credit score there. Also having a good track record of paying off student debt. If you have that, you're just paying the minimum on a monthly basis and you're paying off your student loans on a consistent basis, and you pay whatever bills come in at a consistent basis without being late, you could have a near perfect credit score without having a car loan or a mortgage or any sort of massive other forms of debt.
Helpful. Thanks.
Okay. I'm going to touch on generosity quick, and then we've kind of been doing questions and answers as we go, so we don't have a ton of time for questions, but there'll be some time for that. So generosity, touched on this at the beginning, but if you are someone who kind of subscribes to the Christian faith, you will know the Bible talks a lot about the need for being generous. Even within that, I just want to touch on this kind of theological component of finances. So if you read scripture, one of the big things that's talked about is the love of money is the root of all evil. And so as you're moving throughout your financial journey, which is going to be the rest of your life, you have money as a big part of your life, whether you want it or you don't. That's how you're going to operate. I want you to keep in mind, money is not the root of all evil. Money can be a source of tremendous generosity and good that's happening in this world. The foundation that you're currently sitting in has been created by individuals who have a good amount of money and they're using it for very good things. So money is not evil. The love of money, so the excessive desire to become wealthy for the sake of being wealthy because you think that's going to give you power, maybe something like that, isn't a great thing. So when we think about that, one of the ways that God kind of encourages us to not be a lover of money is to remind ourselves that everything that has been given to us, whether that is little or whether that is a lot, is a gift. And within that, he asks you to do certain things with said money, meaning give some of that away. So a common number that has been thrown around within kind of faith communities, which dates back to a lot of Old Testament scripture, is a tithe. A tithe represents 10%. That is an amazing number for you to give. What I want to say with that is if you graduate and you feel like that is way too much, don't give nothing, because I see that a lot. It's like, well, I can't give 10%, so I'm going to wait until I give 10%. Give 5%. If you can only give 4%, if you can give 9%, don't focus so much on the percentage that you're giving that you decide to not give it all. So if that's $200 a month for you and that's all that you can do $200 a month. If it's $100 and that's all that you can do $100 a month, and start that right away. The reason being is if you're not used to giving money, as your income grows, you're not going to grow used to giving money. You're only going to be used to giving money because it's a core part of your budget from the first day that you have income. So start that right away, and don't start a dollar amount that's going to seem so overwhelming that you're just not going to do it. And then choose where to give. The local church is obviously big. A lot of you have probably been a part of student ministries as you're, in college. As a reminder, every student minister you come in contact with is only able to do their job because of generous people who give to them on a monthly basis. And so if you've really benefited, and I'm not one of those people, so this is not like me telling you to give to me, but if you are one of those people who have benefited from a student ministry, think about how you could thank them by helping being one of their ministry partners in prayer and financially, because they always have that need. So that's kind of my 411 on giving. Do it, figure out where you want to give, and just start right away in whatever dollar amount that is for you. Okay, either on generosity or all of it. I can stop sharing because my next side is just questions. Does anybody have things that are directly related or not related at all to the things that we've talking about, but have something to do with kind of money, income?
I have a question. So,
Yep.
Okay, so I'm planning to go to grad school, but
Yep.
I'm also taking a gap year. So I'm wondering if, when to start paying loans, how much to be paying for those loans, since they won't be deferred for that gap year until I start physician's assistant graduate program. So just kind of when and how to be paying for undergrad and also grad school, and how that's gonna look.
Yeah, that's a good question. Are you planning on doing some sort of work within that gap year?
Yes, hopefully I'll have a full-time job. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to give you some sort of blanket advice. And again, everything finances is so personalized. There's some general rules of thumb. You're going to be wanting to pay something on those. Speaking as broad stroke as possible, but also realistic to your situation. Physician's assistants are going to be high earning individuals, which is neither here nor there. What sort of income you have isn't super relevant. It's what you do with your money. With that being said, you're going to have student debt, and you're going to be having later in life a larger amount of student debt for you, or a larger amount of income for you to be paying off student debt. So you're going to want to pay something because they're not in deferment. So you're supposed to be paying something once they stop being in deferment. You might just want to be paying the minimums. So whatever it is that your minimum payment is on your undergrad. And then as soon as you start your grad school, your undergrad student loans should go back into deferment depending on where those student loans are kind of located at the moment. So you can pay for a year, stop paying, and then once you graduate and become a physician's assistant, you can start paying off both at the same time later in life.
And is that recommended to be paying both of them at the same time, or would it be smart to tackle the undergrad and then do the graduate, or just be paying on both of those?
Yeah, so part of that is going to be dependent on what they tell you, but most likely you'll have to be paying both at the exact same time because neither will be in deferment. You can pay off more during this first year if you want. If you have excess income and you don't feel like you need to be saving it, you can be paying off faster if you want to. It just is dependent on what kind of makes sense for you, whatever your budget allows or what your income is. I think we just got about 2 more minutes. So do we have any other kind of last minute questions?
Yeah, this might not be a super quick answer, but we kind of touched on it, or he mentioned something about it in the main session of how we need to revamp our theology on retirement. And so I know Christians who think actually like saving for retirement goes against God's command to like store up treasures here on earth. Like, and then there's people on the opposite spectrum who like put all their money into saving their retirement, and then they turn a certain age, it's like hands off, now I'm just like not gonna work, enjoy the fruits of my labor kind of thing. Do you think there's like a healthy balance to that, or is it actually, is there like a biblical grounds for saying at this point in my life I'm gonna stop working, or like I don't know if you have any thoughts on that in general?
Yep. So as quick as I can, anytime someone comes to you with a theological perspective on money in scripture, it is always the specific individual's interpretation of how they read scripture. So with that, that's going to be part of my thing too. When you look at the Old Testament, what we see is we see farmers who not only live off the fruits of their labor, but they also create storehouses, and they are storing up grains for when rainy times come, when times of drought come, when they do not have the ability to live off their current crops. So not only do we see things in scripture, but God actually mandates them and tells them there's going to be times where income or current food isn't going to be available to you. So you better be saving and preparing for when those times come. That sometimes people just say that's only emergency savings, though. That's not retirement. So that might seem to be true. The reality is, though, in America, 21st century, we do not operate the same way that they did in biblical times. In biblical times, it was your family's responsibility to financially, spiritually, physically, and medically care for you when you became elderly. We do not operate that way. And so sometimes when people say that, I ask them, if you're following the biblical mandate, do you plan on paying for your parents' healthcare? Do you plan on taking them in? And do you plan on feeding them? If you don't, then you can't say you shouldn't be saving for retirement, because then you're really not following biblical practices, right? So you have to do both at the same time. If you really want to follow what the true kind of tone of scripture has within the Old and New Testament. And within that, if you choose to not save for retirement, you don't get to make medical choices later in your life. You also don't get to leave things behind and have a large impact for individuals. So generosity does not mean that you don't save for retirement. Generosity means when you're in retirement and you save for retirement, what are you doing with those dollars? So a large part of my job is legacy planning. So I sit down with individuals who are older, and we talk about how do you multiply the extra $1 million that you have because you saved well to make a massive impact in charities and places that are really important to you. So it's important to give now, but when you're saving for retirement, you're not saving so that you're going to be rich and live a lush life. The biblical practices that you have now continue on in retirement. And so you need to be giving in retirement, and you can actually give a lot more and in tax-free ways when you save extra in order to be able to do that and plan for that later in life. So that's a very brief answer. But I think that the Bible makes it clear that times of drought or times when you can't work and provide an income are going to happen. And so we're supposed to be saving and planning for those so that we can be independent people who are still able to be generous when others are really suffering because they weren't able to save.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Carly. I appreciate both. That was all practical, but then the theological backing, that was so articulate even in the small amount of time that we had. So I really appreciate that. You had mentioned if we have questions, we could reach out to you. Is there a good way that we can contact you? Like either could you put some contact information in the chat, or could I get that from you and pass it along to the students in this group later?
Yep. So I'll type my email here, but that is going to be absolutely the best method of communication for me. So carly.mccormick@thrivent.com. And then I'm going to send this to everyone. And you can feel free to send this out.
Okay, thank you.
So what I will say is and this is just like how I operate, I usually do not charge seniors who are graduating from college a fee in order to sit down and meet with me. With that being said, it's often volunteer work for me to do that because I really do care for younger individuals to get off on the right step. So with both those things being said, I can't provide an excessive amount of time doing that. And so if you have questions, wait until you have an income so we can actually make traction on some of the questions you have. Before then, it is very common for me to do something of the sort like this, of just a finance 101 occasionally throughout the year for kind of graduating seniors or young adults. And so if you want kind of continuing education, but you're not really working, I'd be more than happy to send you some resources. And once you have some sort of job lined up, I'd be happy to meet with you on a personal basis to kind of answer more questions, if that makes sense.
Thank you. That totally makes sense. Very generous of you. So I appreciate